Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's the 19th of March. Boy, time flies. It is 8:46 p.m., and I'm here to do another installment of the Talamanca Review. Now, tonight, I want to talk a little bit about reality, or let's just call this, I'm not sure reality is the right word. Geez, what is the word? How, what I'm trying to say is how to read the hologram. How do you read the hologram? You know, I've been finding myself increasingly agitated, and I suppose I shouldn't be. And I'm not like losing sleep over it or anything. But I'm finding myself increasingly agitated by a lot of the information that is coming into the public space now under the umbrella of spiritual. I suppose I've let this slip in several different ways over the last few podcasts. I made that offhanded commentary about Darryl Anka, aka Bashar, and that is an example of what I mean. And, you know, sometimes something that I say just in the moment while doing the Talamanca Review, while in the stream of inspiration, while in the flow of the podcast, which once begun just comes out like a river. You can't really stop, right? That's the whole point of a fireside narrative, a shamanic story, or some kind of meaningful oration, is that it comes from a heart space that is connected to what I would call divine inspiration and divine imagination. And what I said about Bashar, and I'll extend this to any number of people out there, um, um, Matthias De Stefano at Gaia, very pleasant man, nothing really odious about him, nice guy. But he's definitely in this class as well. Andrew Bartzis is definitely was definitely a aristocrat in this world of pseudo spirituality. Pretty much everybody out there is almost completely full of shit now. Now, there are people who aren't, but nobody knows about them. And, it brings us to a very interesting question. And that question is, to what extent does the society, the cultural milieu, the culture, the norms and standards, and the functioning of a society inhibit the expression of truth? And what aspects of a society would contribute to the inhibition of truth? And are there any societies capable of telling a complete truth to its people? It might surprise you to know that every society on this planet, I haven't lived in them all, but I've lived in 4: Canadian, American. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I lived in the United States for 3 years as a contract IT worker, technical writer. I worked in Michigan. I worked in New York. I worked in New Jersey. And I worked in Buffalo. And I would rent an apartment. I would go in on what's called a T1 visa. And that was a visa that you used to be able to get under NAFTA. And you just show up at the border with your letter of employment, and you want to get to the border during working hours because they may call the person who hired you. And then if all goes well, and it always did for me, you get the stamp in your passport, and then you have like a 1-year residency, and you get to work in the United States. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I enjoyed living in the States. A very different culture from Canada. You know, the funny thing about cultures is the more they're alike, but different, the more you notice the difference. When you go to a place that's completely upside down like China, you don't focus on the difference because everything is so different. And I mean, the first time you walk into a bathroom and there's a marble hole, ovular, not circular, but an ovular hole in the ground. And you literally have to crouch down on your heels and get your ass over this little hole, and you take a dump. It's almost like squatting and dumping walking through the woods. And then you get up and you flush, and you wipe and you flush. And you go, wow, this is really different. Then you go get a bite to eat, and they hand you chopsticks, and you go, oh, this is really different. You look at the streets and the neon and the bustling and the density. You go, wow, this is really different. But everything is different. And because everything is different, you're not focusing on things and nitpicking. But when people are like 95% similar, there's something about that 5% difference that drives them crazier being around each other than if they were 95% different and 5% similar. It's a very strange dynamic. Those of you who have traveled and lived abroad know what I'm talking about. Others of you may not understand what I'm talking about. It's an experiential thing, as are so many of the things I discuss on the Talamanca Review. So the little differences in the United States really threw me for a loop. Like, I remember being in a burger place with some coworkers, and a guy walked in street clothes with a .357 Magnum strapped to his hip. Now, it's not like I'd never seen a gun before. Obviously, we have police in Canada, and obviously they carry 9mm, but they're always in uniform. You never see and the plainclothes guys, like the detectives and stuff like that, I don't think they carry firearms in Toronto. They're not like putting themselves in dangerous situations. They come in and they do the mental work, the investigation to solve a crime. So most of the detectives I've known, homicide detectives, they're not carrying guns, right? So it's in Canada, it's just the constables that carry guns. and they're always the same sort of holster. You can't really see the gun. There's a flap over the holster, and there's this emphasis on sort of occulting instruments of death in Canada. Whereas when you go to the US, man, there's guns everywhere, everywhere. And it's kind of freaky to be, you're in a burger shop and this guy walks in, the handlebar mustache. I mean, he was probably a cop, but no badge, jeans and a shirt, and he's just doing this open carry thing. And you're going, welcome to America, welcome to America. So the question is, to what degree can any culture tell the truth? And where does a culture lie? And when do those lies become really dangerous? And a culture that lies is dangerous at the point it becomes so spiritually polluted, you can't tell the truth anymore. And then you're in a lot of trouble, because once truth is shut down, you've basically started a death clock for that society. Okay? It may take 1 generation, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the amount of force they use to control people. I mean, but not that long. And you may be thinking already, oh, Bruce, what about North Korea? Well, North Korea has only been North Korea since the mid-50s. That's like a generation and a half, 2 generations, if a generation is 33 years. That's only 2 generations, and it will collapse eventually. It has to collapse. It cannot go on the way it's going on. But we don't know to what degree truth can be told in North Korea. The truth about men and women, the truth of family, the truth of waking up and being joyful every day. There's many kinds of truth. Do they have a better marriage? Do they have less divorce in North Korea? Do the families stay together? Do they at least, have that? And in my experience, everybody has something. And we have this tendency to notice what other cultures are missing. And then if you stay in that other culture long enough and you go back to your birth culture, what you notice is all the things you missed about that culture that you had normalized that have now been denormalized and deprogrammed in your perception. And you ask yourself, why did I ever even believe that? The rule of thumb amongst the traveling class in the world has been, for quite some time, that the time of reverse cultural shock will be equal to the amount of time you spent outside of your culture. Reverse culture shock is when you come back home after a long absence, after living somewhere else. So when I landed at Lester B. Pearson International Airport in the fall of 1994, after returning from a nearly 2-year journey in Taiwan, I was astounded at how different the culture was. Nothing had changed in Canada, but my perception of it had completely changed. And my perception has completely changed here as well, except now through the digital connectivity and the two-dimensional connectivity through voice and vision, which is the miracle of the modern communication systems. I can sort of note the things now. I can sort of document them. And I can sort of see them clearly. Whereas when I went to Taiwan, that's it. You're in. You forget all about Canada. There was no internet from 92 to 94. And you're just off in this world. You don't call home because, a 10-minute phone call is like $50 with the long distance charges. So there's not really much calling home. And you immerse yourself in the foreign culture, and then you come back and you get hit with the reverse culture shock. You want to know what was going on when I got back from Taiwan? What everybody was talking about? You're not going to believe this. Pulp Fiction. And I remember getting together with some people I went to university with, not my program, but outside of the journalism program. I had made a number of good friends in the film program. The university I went to has a film program. It's produced a few good directors in Canada. If you're not Canadian, you've never heard of them probably. But what it was really good at was producing people who could work in the film and TV industry. Um, that was very hands-on. They had access to like handheld cameras and the stuff that people really use making movies. And so they were able to learn the equipment, and a lot of people who went to that program ended up finding work in the film industry, not as writers or producers or directors or actors per se, but as the 99% of people we don't know, unless you stay and attentively read the credits after every TV show and every movie, you have no clue who these people are. And I was sitting there, and they were just going on and on and on about Pulp Fiction. And here I am, 2 years in the Far East. I've been speaking nothing but Mandarin for a year because after I learned Mandarin well enough to speak it conversationally, I stopped for the most part hanging around with foreigners. When I go to another culture, I don't do the Chinatown thing. That's what about 90% of the people who come to Costa Rica do. I call it the Chinatown thing because when the Chinese emigrate, they cluster together and they form a little micro China wherever they're living. They prefer to live among themselves. And there's a bit of that going on with North Americans too. I mean, when you come to Costa Rica, you find gated communities that are all American and Canadian. You find certain areas of Costa Rica that are very densely populated with Americans and Canadians and Europeans, and they sort of prefer to be around each other. They're not the dominant personality, the way Chinatown becomes the dominant ethnicity. The Chinese become the dominant ethnicity of a Chinatown, but they're disproportionately represented in one locale, and they form a kind of a facsimile of what the Chinese do when they emigrate. I don't do that. When I go somewhere, like the first 6 months or so, or maybe the first year I'm there, I'll get to know some of the foreign community from North America because you need a lot of assistance. You have a lot of questions. What do I do with it, with this? How do I get a phone card from my phone? How do I do this? How do I do that? And that's what you do. And but after I feel comfortable in a society, my pattern and my habit is to generally avoid the foreigners there because I want to live the way the people in the culture I'm in are living. That's what I'm there to do. I'm there for the immersive experience. So by the time I left Taiwan, I was practically Taiwanese. And I'm very, very Costa Rican now. You know, the way I live in Costa Rica, it's the way Costa Ricans lived a generation ago in rural areas with part of their food supply in their backyard. Campesinos, where and most people, most North Americans, when they come here, they don't want to live like this. They want to live in a place that might have a Starbucks. They want to live close to a grocery store that has some imported foods they might want to buy. And they don't really want to learn Spanish. They want to just speak English and have their cultural experience over there. But more to the point, I'll tell you what it is. People are comfortable in environments where they can express their status, even if that status was gained in another place, in another circumstance, in another time. So when you get into an expat community, when you're abroad, you know, people will give you the whole ego trip spiel about who they were back in the world, right? Oh, I was so and so. I was the executive vice president of this country, of this company. And they want their accomplishments and their status acknowledged. And why would you want that acknowledged in a foreign country? Why not just make your mark where you are and impact the people you're living with? It's sort of mysterious to me. Now, one of the things that I like about this culture is how they love each other. It's an old world love. They're more comfortable in groups than they are alone. And in that regard, I'm an anomaly. I can function in the groups, but I'm more comfortable alone. But I've become an integral part of a group, an integral part of a large family. And principally because I can cast my line into the digital world and reel in money. And it's almost like a magic trick to them. Bruce really makes money in that little back room where his computer is set up, and my wife Rosemary is, yeah, he writes for a living. I don't know exactly what he writes. It's something to do with computers or technology, and they're like, huh? Because where I live, work is in a field with a machete, in a field with a plow, with a chainsaw. It's always something physical. All work where I live is physical. There's no mental work, and yet I do mental work and I work remotely. Something I would not have been able to do in Taiwan. So that's interesting. But one of the things you notice when you're living in a foreign society, and I would not say that this society is foreign to me anymore, but I have certain perspectives that are entrenched in me as a Canadian. And I don't know if this is just me and I have an overly critical mind, which that could very well be the case because I've gone out of my way to develop a critical mind. And I don't mean that in an anti-spiritual sense, like I go around criticizing people, but a critical mind is absolutely critical to being a decent writer. I don't think I've ever said this on air. When I was working with Anthony and Bob, Bob was sort of like the spiritual consigliere on The Devil in Us, and Anthony Palmowski in Australia was the chapter-by-chapter editor. In about 2 months, I wrote 40,000 words, and and now 40,000 words is half a book. I mean, most of you haven't written 40,000 words in your entire life, including all the papers you wrote in university and high school combined. Every essay, every thesis, everything you've ever written doesn't amount to 40,000 words. But I got 40,000 words into this book, and then I said to Bob and Anthony, we're scrapping this and starting over. And they're like, what? And I said, yeah, I needed to do all this just to find the real starting point to the book. And Spirit told me what the real starting point was, but it's kind of like hacking through the jungle of your consciousness to find the spot you're looking for to begin and to set your trajectory to get out, right? And it took me 40,000 words to do that. Now, if I didn't have a highly developed critical mind, I would have been too attached to the 40,000 words to start over. But I was like brutally honest with myself. I said, no, this is bullshit. But what I realized writing those first 40,000 words was how to write the book. And books come to me as structures. That's how they come to me. And so, and for those of you who've read all of my work, you'll see some extraordinary structural work going on. I think the most incredible piece of structural integrity in a narrative structure was the epigrammatic style of the Galactic Historian, which was 3 sections, 2 chapters to a section, and 12 parts to a chapter, each with a subtitle. And each of the subsections was about 1,000 words. And some of them were a bit longer, and so the book ended up being about 80,000 words. So it's 3 sections, 6 chapters, 12 sections to a chapter. So basically, it's 72 modules of writing organized into 3 sections and 6 chapters. I'll let you people who understand a little bit about numerology figure that out. But it just came to me that way. Okay? So, and the structure for the devil in us was 1/3 opening in terms of word volume, 1/3 opening. No, sorry, 1/4 opening, 1/2 in the middle, and 1/4 closing. Okay, and those of you who've read the book, you know how it turned out. So the opening is my childhood. The middle is mapping the 4 generations of my family to the 4 generations of the societal movement that we've been through in the 20th century. And the closing 25% is just sort of wrapping it all up and explaining, what I learned and what I can pass on as a result of all this. So the point is, I have a critical mind, a highly developed critical mind. So one of the first things I notice when I'm living in a foreign culture is the things that they've really got wrong. And the thing is, you can't really say anything, right? Because you're a foreigner. And the thing is, let me explain it to you this way. I'll come up with a really good expression. You have no idea what gaslighting is until you're living in a foreign culture and you're the only one who sees what you're seeing, but you're right. Universally, you're right. Any other country other than the one you're living in, and maybe their immediate neighbors who share a certain climate, diet, and culture. I mean, Catholic, Latino, close to the equator. So maybe they would understand it in Panama, and they would understand it in Nicaragua. But beyond a few small groups of countries, the rest of the world would universally agree with me that this is wrong. But when you're living in that culture, you get gaslit. But the people aren't. Gaslighting is when the people who are doing it to you, telling you you're wrong, actually know you're right, and it's a form of psychological and really satanic manipulation. So I'm not really being gaslit, but nobody wants to see what I'm saying because the truth of it is too difficult, and it would force upon them a level of self-reflection that they're not prepared for. And self-reflection is very difficult because most of what we see when we're looking at ourselves, until we start to get a little bit of grace, is just complete shit. All of us, including me. I mean, like, human beings are fucking horrible. We just are. And it's this midpoint we are in the evolutionary scale between the simple instinctual dignity of a mammal that doesn't break its programs and doesn't do anything irrational. A jaguar is what a jaguar is. An anteater is what an anteater is. A bear is. A monkey is. But human beings, we have this ability to take our concept of self to absurd and demonic proportions, becoming destructive to ourselves and everything around us. We're, in many ways, an absolutely absurd invention. And that's the truth. And those of you who've done your 5,000 or 10,000 hours of meditation in the last decade, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In contemplative circles, they call it the dark night of the soul. It's one of the dark nights of the soul. It's where you start to confront your own shit. Okay, and you go, fuck, am I really that bad? And then if you haven't built up a little bit of grace and a little bit of spiritual equity in your consciousness, you could twist off into a suicidal depression. I'm not even joking. The inner life is not a game. Not a game. Okay? Most philosophers go mad or become so eccentric. It's a neurosis that's almost equivalent to madness. Schopenhauer, Hegel, Nietzsche. And I'm sure if we were to get into a time machine, Aristotle was completely fucking nuts. You know, it's fine to read these guys on paper, but remember, you've never lived with them. Never lived with them. Never woken up, had a coffee with them. Never done their laundry. Never walked a dog with them. You don't know, right? But they, because of the inner reflection that they've done, they would agree with my fundamental pessimistic hypothesis about humanity. Our only dignity is our ability to reach the divine. That's it. That's our only dignity. And if you think of everybody that you can call to your mind's eye right now, the only ones that you feel warmly about and you feel good about are the ones who've attained a little bit of grace. Right? Look at the historical record. Who do we remember? Right? Why is it that India remembers all its saints and Mahatmas? Why do we remember Christ? Why do we remember Moses? Why do we remember Isaiah, Jacob? Why do we remember Thor? Why do we remember Zeus? Why do we remember Odin? These mythological constructs, which are actually real, by the way, because they're part of a higher station and they have a connection with grace, and that's why we remember them. Okay? So where's all this going tonight? Well, I'll tell you where this is going. For reasons I don't really understand, because I never really understand why my consciousness does what it does, because it's partly objectified, meaning that the data that comes in is objective. Okay? And so I just get these, I don't want to use any of this friggin' flaky new age language, a download but you just get things. And the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, I've had this nagging desire to look at capitalism in a critical way, which I've been hesitant to do because I don't want to put any gasoline on a fire that's already burning. Because at least 60 or 70% of the Western world is leaning communist now. Ireland, Scotland, and Britain and Wales are probably gonna go communist. That's what this is all leading up to. Okay, and if they manage to take Trump out, we're going communist. Okay, you could literally make the case now, and I'm not even joking, that Vladimir Putin and the KGB are fighting a new communist resurgence. Isn't that ironic? I mean, it's the very definition of irony. We fight a 50-year Cold War with these people who are defending communism. We're defending capitalism. We're 33 years past the Cold War, and we're ready to go at it again with the Russians defending the new capital system and Western Europe and North America wanting to go communist. It's just in our DNA. We're not happy unless we're fighting. The, the only people who can escape this are people who take up serious spiritual practice and deal with their inner shit. Okay? Otherwise, you're just going to be moved by these inner winds and currents and outer winds and currents of social change, and you're going to go with them. Like I said the other night, differing schools of Tibetan Buddhism several centuries in the past went to war with each other. Now, I mean, this is not, mechanized warfare, but they went at each other with bows and arrows and spears and swords, and they killed each other. Two different schools of Tibetan Buddhism. Okay? The Dalai Lama tells that story. Okay? And again, look at the Islamic world. Okay? This thing I've come up with that you could, if you're 95% different from someone, you'll get along with them. If you're 95% the same, you'll probably get into a fight with them at some point. Okay? So another example is the Sunni and Shia. I mean, I mean, they agree on everything. They agree on the Hadith. They agree on Muhammad as the last prophet in the Abrahamic system. They agree on 99% of what Islam is. Do you know what the principal disagreement is in the Sunni and Shia systems? About the necessity of a prayer mat. Hand to God. That's it. Okay? And they're willing to kill over this. Okay? Outside of organized crime, the vast majority of murders that cops deal with are people who are supposed to love each other. Riddle me that. You know, how does that happen? The husband who kills his wife, strangles her, or the wife who poisons her husband, or as that Babbitt or Babcock woman did in Long Island, cut her husband's dick off. Those people would never cut a stranger's dick off or uh, uh, strangle a strange woman because they're not serial killers, but they'll strangle the person closest to them. This is why I say we're such a strange creature, human beings. This is why I take meditation so seriously. Okay? Because I think it's the only escape. The only way out is within. And that's why I take the inner life so seriously. So I started to think about capitalism, and then when I'm getting fed this stuff, whatever's giving it to me, my unconscious, higher order beings that are communicating with me, which I think is usually the case. Okay? Because once you start to break open in the contemplative space, you start to get a lot of data from other beings. And they communicate with you in such a subtle way that it takes a long time to even figure out it's going on. You just think it's you. Oh, hey, that's my muse. How did I write this book? Oh, that was my muse. Well, you ever stop and think what a muse might be? You know, I've I've written books and used words, and when I type the word out, I go, "What the hell is that? I've never even heard of that word before." I grab the Oxford Concise Dictionary, I look it up, it's the perfect word. I go, "How did I do that? I don't even know that word." Right? It's like this miraculous little process that happens in creative space, contemplative space, prayer space. You connect with the greater dimensions. So, one of the things that came into my mind as I was thinking about this was Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. And that might have been the first warning we got about maybe this capitalism is not all it's cracked up to be. For those of you who don't know, it's about a salesman named Willie Loman. He's got two sons. I mean, I think it got a Pulitzer Prize. It was on Broadway for years. Arthur Miller, the writer, became so famous for writing it that he was briefly married to Marilyn Monroe. This is when writers were like rock stars, in the 50s and 60s before movies took over everything. And It's a very depressing portrait of a salesman's life. And then we get another follow-up by another brilliant Jewish writer. Arthur Miller was Jewish. And then we get another brilliant follow-up from the absolutely brilliant David Mamet with Glengarry Glen Ross, right? Another scathing criticism of capitalism. And I never say anything really negative about the system we live in because I still think for the most part it's better than the other systems. And it preserves certain core things that I think are so important, they're worth fighting for, even if there's this growing and aggregating negativity to our system. But sometimes it just really sucks. I'll give you one example. Now, you can say this is my opinion, but if you're a literate person, it's closer to being a fact than an opinion. If you're not a literate person, and by literate, I don't mean you can read, you read and write and you know your 26 letters, lowercase and capital, and your 5 vowels, long and short sound. That's not what I mean by literate. What I mean by literate is well-read. You would understand that Cormac McCarthy is probably one of the greatest writers to come about in the English language in the last 200 or 300 years. I mean, this guy is an epic writer. Epic. Like towering over everything around him. But he wasn't able to sell himself. He never did interviews. And so when he did his best work, his two best books are Suttree, which was published in 1979. He just died a few years ago I think last year or the year before, he died at the age of 89. And so one of his best books is called Suttree. It was written in 1979, and this is like Mark Twain updated. It's like unbelievable, like black comedy, like beyond Monty Python. It's about a guy who gives up on society and lives on a riverboat on whatever the main river. I think it's the Mississippi River in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this group of friends he has and acquaintances, and they all live sort of off the grid, and it's just unbelievably funny, and the philosophical profundity of it is mind-boggling without being pretentious. Okay? And then the next, his truly his magnum opus, is a book he published in 1985 called Blood Meridian. And I think it's the greatest American novel written since Moby Dick, and maybe better than Moby Dick. Now, why am I saying this? Because nobody knew who this guy was until like almost the mid 2000s. He started to break out a little bit when his publishing company got him to relax a bit and tone down his style to make him more marketable. And he came out with All the Pretty Horses, a trilogy called the Border Trilogy. All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities of the Plain. And that kind of got him a little bit more notoriety. But what really kicked him over the top was No Country for Old Men, and that being made into a movie by the Coen brothers, and The Road, which got him his Oprah interview. But by the time all this happened, he was in his 70s, mid 70s. Like, his life was all over. And he never played the marketing game. Oprah asked him, like, why haven't you done any interviews? He goes, I don't think it's good for a writer. That's his answer. And she went over in the interview about how poor he was at certain points of his life. And he said, it didn't matter. I was able to write, and that's all I love doing. And then he added, all you really need in life is a little bit of food and shoes. When he wrote Blood Meridian, he lived in a bunkhouse that it was subterranean, okay, under an abandoned oil dirge in Texas. So I think he wrote on a manual typewriter, and he wrote by lamplight, like oil lamplight. He had no money. Okay? And he just kept doing what he loved in life. And this guy was an American treasure. And when he's doing his most powerful work, we're celebrating mediocre writers like Margaret Atwood, like John Updike, like John Cheever, like what's the other John? There's the three Johns. Anyways, the third John wrote, The World According to Garp, Cider House Rules. You may have seen, um, some of the movies if you haven't read the books, but I mean, they were enjoyable books. But these guys, why can't I remember that guy's name? John Updike, John Cheever, and John Cheever. John Updike was just a shitty writer, but for some reason the New Yorker loved him. Okay, the hell is the other guy? I can't believe how my mind starts to blank at 58. John Irving. Yeah, the three Johns. And then, your Susan Sontag, your Joyce Carol Oates, Norman Mailer. And these are all mediocre writers. I mean, these are like stand-ins, right? Like, um, you know, they've mastered their craft, but they really don't have enough inner resources to produce great literature. And these guys are the talk of the town for like 15 years, from like 1979 to the early 90s. And same thing with Margaret Atwood. She's not that good a writer. And, but they were able to produce books. So, I mean, John Updike wrote a lot about sex. And his father was a Protestant minister. And he had somehow become of this mindset in the 80s that, North America was a sexually uptight culture. And so he should write about sex. He wrote a lot about sex. John Irving was very politically correct, like a darling of the liberal. I'll bet you, people like Hillary Clinton would like John Irving. I mean, Cider House Rules is about why a society should allow abortion, basically. The World According to Garp is, and Cider House Rules. But he's a social political writer, and a darling of the left. So he got boosted up by the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, New York Times. This is our great writer. Because the machine could sell that stuff. And so I'm working around to my point here. Have we gone in this Willy Loman model so far, in this sales model? So and really it culminates with idiots like the Tate brothers. And to a certain extent, despite his conversational abilities, which are quite remarkable, I will admit that, the lunacy of somebody like Joe Rogan. These cavemen troglodytes masquerading as intellectuals and insightful people in the early 21st century. It's a fucking joke. If you were to put these guys in a time machine and put them on the Dick Cavett show on a panel with Gore Vidal or Norman Mailer or Buckminster Fuller, they'd be so psychologically damaged they'd be institutionalized. That's how high the caliber of conversation and debate was in the 70s and 80s. And for those of you who can remember and contextualize it, and it's very difficult now, I have become convinced that the two-dimensional technologies of our cell phones and our computers are contracting our memories and contracting the context of our lives. Mine is intact because I meditate a lot. Okay? And there's another plug for the inner life is not a lifestyle choice anymore. It's a martial art. It's what the Tate brothers and Joe Rogan should be doing, rather than going to the gym and trying to save something that's unsavable, because all bodies perish. But the spirit goes on forever. So the work you put into your spirit in a life, you carry forward. I don't know why this is so difficult for people to understand. But I've come to the conclusion that we've really fucked things up here. And that we're now living in a culture that celebrates the people who can scream the loudest, or pull their tits out of their dress, or pull their dick out of their pants. And that's not a good thing. And on top of that, we're so arrogant, we think we're the best in the world. You know? Oh, these primitive backward societies, these backward Islamic societies. Yeah, there are backwards Islamic societies. Afghanistan, Pakistan, they're shitholes. Boy buggery, wife beating, and, but those are just shitty people. If you converted them all to Christianity or Judaism, they'd still be shitty people. They're just genetically shitty people. Okay? But Islam is actually kind of beautiful. You go to Dubai. Look at what's going on. Saudi Arabia is the future of humanity with the construction and investment they're doing there. And Dubai as well. Okay? They're like the future of humanity. They're leaps and bounds beyond us now. Yet their women still wear burqas, right? But we never stop to properly contextualize things. If you're the father of an 18-year-old daughter and two options were put before you, and one of the two realities was going to come about. Let's say you rubbed a bottle and a genie came out and he said, oh, your 18-year-old daughter is going to take one of two paths in life, but I'm going to give you the wish power to make sure she takes one. And the two paths are OnlyFans or a burqa. Which would you choose? Okay. Well, I'm sad to say that a lot of the idiots in Western society now would say, oh, OnlyFans. Let a bunch of strangers fuck my daughter on camera. She's got to make a living. And they don't for a moment stop and think about how depraved that is. And yet these same fucking morons will stand up and point their finger at another culture. Oh, look at what they're doing over there. Look at what... So the question then becomes is, what are we really fighting for? What is the point of supporting a guy like Trump if this culture is so degraded and so despoiled now? What is the point? Well, even though it's a bad example of freedom now, it still is the last bastion of freedom. And people with free will should be allowed to do what they want to do, even if that is encourage their 18-year-old daughter to go on to OnlyFans and suck dick for money. However, and by the way, nobody's following us on this path. India's not, China's not, the Middle East is not, Africa's not, Europe, maybe a little bit in Europe, but it's at its pitch. In North America, we've become a vulgar society. And a lot of it has to do with money and the culture of sales. Look at how it's infected science. Trust the science, they're all saying, right? Well, the science is what gets paid for. So the people with the money determine what even becomes experimented upon. So how can you trust the science if it's under the direction of people who only want to profit from it rather than reveal truth? Just like the publishing companies only wanted to profit from selling books rather than champion a real writer like Cormac McCarthy. Capitalism. What are you going to do? I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.